So we are started. My guest is Joti Brar from CPGBML, and at the beginning I would like to say that it is a great honor for me that we can talk today. My YouTube adventure began in 2017, and I was inspired to create my own channel by the activities of the Stalin Society. Until now, I thought that people who respect the achievements of Comrade Stalin are only pensioners from the countries of the former USSR, and there is no hope for NATO countries, and the communist movement here is dominated by Trotskyists and other opponents of the USSR. Thanks to your videos, I saw that I am not alone, so I am very grateful to you, your father, and your brother, and other comrades who created this project. Thank you.
Wow. Well, it's really lovely to know, Comrade Michal, that we had that impact on you. And, you know, our movement is an international movement, and sometimes you need the proof of that to make it real to you. You know it in theory, but in practice, sometimes it doesn't feel true. So I'm really happy that we were able to have that impact. It has been the positive side of the internet, has been the ability of people to find one another when they were looking. You know, if you're not looking, the algorithm will never give you communist content. But if you know how to look, you can find good stuff.
Okay, so now I will ask the first question. At the moment when we record our conversation, the famous NATO-sponsored counter-offensive of the Ukrainian army is underway, and although the destruction of more German Leopard tanks or American Bradleys is a good news, thousands of Ukrainian soldiers are dying in our eyes, who were forcibly conscripted into the army as a result of roundups in the streets of the Ukrainian cities. If it weren't for sending Western weapons and pushing Zelensky on a senseless offensive, these Ukrainians would still be alive. Can you talk about the Anti-Imperialist Platform and what is your strategy to stop the expansion of NATO imperialism?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I mean, first of all, you're absolutely right, Michal, to highlight the fact that if it wasn't for the activities of NATO, hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of Ukrainians would still be alive. More than that, if it wasn't for the activities of the capitalist roaders, the capitalist wreckers, and then the imperialists after the collapse of the or fall of the Soviet Union, many, many more Ukrainians would be alive, and not only alive, but thriving as they did in the times of the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. You know, fundamentally, what we have to understand is capitalism is our enemy, and imperialism is capitalism which has gone global, and therefore it's taken its contradictions global. And this predatory nature of finance capital, which preys upon the entire globe and loots its resources, sucks the wealth to itself, uses its huge financial power that's backed up by military power to pull the wealth from every corner of the globe and impoverish the masses, is the defining feature of the world today. Now, what's been really, I mean, it's been bought at a terrible price, and you've highlighted that, Michal, but what has been really salutary for our movement and really important for workers around the world has been the way that since the war in Ukraine escalated, I don't think it's right to say the war started a year and a half ago, but it escalated in February 2022, the war that had already been going on for 8 years and was being fueled but officially ignored in the West. Since that escalation, since Russia became openly involved and was forced to become physically involved in Ukraine, many things about the world have become very, very clear to people who are paying attention, and increasingly clear even to quite ordinary people on the street who weren't paying attention to a lot of things before that. And certainly to people in our movement around the world, there's a clarifying substance to this war, which is it's really highlighting how the imperialist system is in a crisis. Economically, it's really struggling. We have inflation issues, we have overproduction problems, we have the impoverishment of the masses, we have a desperate drive to secure the dominance of the imperialists, and at the same time, we have this coalescence of a bloc of countries who for a long time were separately struggling against imperialism and were starting in different ways to cooperate a bit or to try to find ways to survive despite the oppression that was put on them by the imperialists. But this period has really helped them come together in a much more open way to recognize that trying to work with or pacify the hostility of imperialism doesn't work. And so it's made things much clearer, I think, for people everywhere who is on which side. So the platform was really formed to help bring clarity to the socialist movement, because unfortunately, because of the long period we've had since the collapse of the Soviet Union, and really before that, since the revisionism of the Khrushchev era in the Soviet Union, there's been a slow and then increasingly fast degeneration and demoralization of the communist movement in particular. And what that means is that increasing numbers of people who identify as communist and organizations and leaderships of communist parties and communist movements and anti-imperialist movements, particularly in the West, have been prey to imperialist ideology. And what that's meant is, at this crucial moment, when the war in Ukraine has broken out, some of the loudest voices from the biggest communist organizations in the world are telling the workers the wrong thing. Instead of explaining that aggressive NATO imperialism led by the USA is attacking Russia in order to break it up and loot it, what they are telling the workers is Russia aggressively invaded Ukraine with imperialist intent. This is totally anti-historical. It gets rid of all of the context of the 30 years leading up to Russia's movement into Ukraine, what actually been going on in Ukraine, when Ukraine really lost its sovereignty. It wasn't in 2022 because of Russian tanks. You know, it was in 2004 and then 2014 with Westback coups, right? But in the name of communism, big parties around the world are amplifying imperialist propaganda. And the imperialist propaganda is Russia is aggressive, Russia is imperialist, Russia must be broken up. And they cover this agenda by using our terminology. They talk about, you must have heard this, I'm sure, decolonization. It's a very academic way of sounding anti-imperialist, decolonization. Right? And openly, there are some incredibly right-wing elements in the European Union using European Union premises to hold meetings about their agenda of decolonizing Russia, right? And making it sound to the uninitiated as if they are the upholders of national liberation struggle. When, of course, nothing could be further from the truth. So, you know, you have to study Marxism to be able to differentiate just empty terminology from concrete reality. And the problem with so many of the organizations that are calling themselves communist today is they have actually assisted in the process of separating the masses from Marxism. And so they've created parties and organizations and an audience which is unversed in real Marxist theory, and therefore is totally prey to all of these misappropriations of terminology and this amplification of bourgeois propaganda, despite the fact that it so obviously doesn't fit with our material reality. You know, if you go to Russia and to Africa and ask many of the countries there who are kicking out the French, for the first time in many decades.
There is some problem with your microphone. That there is some. I think that there is some cable which are touching each other. I don't know because. Now it's not.
No, are you not getting a good signal from me?
I'm hearing you, but I'm hearing you with something. Could you watch your cables or
an echo?
Maybe it's not good connected.
No, my microphone is built in, and
because because you are talking a lot of interesting things, and it's good to the viewers and listeners to understand all. And could you say something now?
Yes, this is me.
Yes, yes, it's all the time this problem.
No
Okay.
problem. Do you, hang on a minute. What happens if I do this? Hang on.
Maybe it's a American agency which are trying to disturb our message.
Wouldn't surprise me at all. Just 1 second. Let me here we go. Let's try this. Hello, does that work?
No, no, unfortunately not. No, we have. I am hearing you. But if you don't, if you if you know how to solve this problem, we can try. If not,
So 1 second. Okay, so this is no good, right?
yes, yes.
That's no
When
good.
you are talking, there is some echo with the sound, which is not good.
Okay. And if I try to switch to this microphone, does that make any difference?
No.
It's the same. So then it's not to do with the microphones, it's something on the line. Both my microphones are built in, so there's no cables here. Something's happening on the internet between us.
Okay. So let's continue with these problems. For simplify the things which you are said, we can say that every time when NATO have war with some countries, it's always dictature there. It's always bad things. That there is never in history situation when the enemy of NATO was a state with democracy, with with everything which is good. And very often, always we have the one very bad individual. His name is Saddam Hussein or Gaddafi or Putin, and he has a lot of illness, a lot of other. It's funny when we are watching this primitive propaganda with every war, but it's working.
You know,
It's
Mikhail, I just want to interrupt you there to highlight something you said, right? You talk about the way they demonize the leadership of a country they want to target and how much of a role that propaganda plays in creating the kind of narrative and the acceptance for the wars they want to wage. This person, that's right, Ernest. This person is insane, essentially. If you looked at the journal of psychology in the USA, and since the USA tends to lead the world in so many things, essentially it's a world-leading professional journal for psychologists, right? Psychology Today in the USA. In the run-up to and the early stages of the special military operation beginning in February 2022, that newspaper, I think in February and March of that year, ran something like 10 different articles about Vladimir Putin's mind. Right? This is not psychology. It's propaganda pure and simple. It's not history. It's not politics. It's not anything to do with helping anybody understand anything. Right? But this is the way they do. They're running this war like a Hollywood film script.
hello.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I hear you. Yes, I agree with this, but it's very funny because, for example, in the last electoral campaign in USA, in the time when Joe Biden discussed with Donald Trump, he attacked Donald Trump, Biden attacked Donald Trump, that Trump have good relations with some authoritarian countries. And he named the authoritarian countries Poland, of Kaczynski, and Hungary of Orban. And so Biden 3 years ago said openly that Poland is authoritarian country, and now Poland, when this special military operation started, I can say like anti-imperialist from Poland that the authoritarian processes in Poland is much more bigger. The Poland became the Polish dictature, even totalitarian state, because everybody which is not agree with this pro-Ukrainian, pro-NATO propaganda now have a lot of problems. So the situation in Poland is worse, and in the same time the official propaganda is that it is the war, the democracies against authoritarian. So Poland became a democracy in the so it's very fluid, that one day you are authoritarian state, another day you are democracy, and you can come back to be authoritarian when you are not agree with United States.
You really see two things at work here, don't you? One is that the tendency in an imperialist political discourse, even a bourgeois political discourse from a certain point in history onwards, where words become devoid of meaning. They're just thrown around as and when, and as you say, swapped around with no consistency, continuity. So it's literally just words. It's just a covering. It's just icing on a cake, rather than something with meaning. What's interesting, I think, about and significant about the terminology that the bourgeoisie and the imperialist bourgeoisie in particular use in this era is they have co-opted a lot of the language of socialism. Now, why is that? Ever since the October Revolution, they've had the same ideology, actually. They're still supremacists, all of them, the rulers of the world, right? They still despise the working class. They still treat us as cannon fodder. You can see the same mentality of the generals from the world directing the World War I trenches that you see with the CIA directing the Ukraine forces. Right? They don't care how many people they throw in front of guns that they definitely will be mowed down by, as long as they achieve their objective. If they can keep feeding that sausage machine, when they run out of Ukrainians, as you know well, heaven forfend, but it's the Poles next, and the people of the Baltic countries, and they're lining up their party armies, as fast as long as they've got people to feed into that, they don't care how many lives, right? Their ideology, their supremacism is still intact, but the way they speak in public has changed completely. And that's the pressure, actually, of public opinion. That's the popularity of socialism and the goals of socialism and the achievements of socialism that ever since the October Revolution, the oppressors of the world have to pretend to be on the side of the workers. Back in the days of the heydays of the British Empire, we had Rudyard Kipling writing poems about the white man's burden. Even if these ungrateful fuckers, pardon my language, if people don't appreciate what you're doing for them, the fact is you're doing it for their benefit because you're better and they need your help to be civilized. Right? That was openly expressed supremacist ideology of imperialism. Since the October Revolution, they can't talk like that. So, of course, the fact that they have to talk in the language of liberation and workers' rights and human rights and equality and all these things and democracy, actually it shows a weakness on the part of the system. Number one, their actual aims are not popular with the masses. Number two, the hypocrisy becomes very evident. Ever since the collapse of the USSR and this ramping up of aggressive imperialism once more on the world stage and the launching of war after war after war to try to create a unipolar, total global hegemony, what we've seen is the increasing cynicism of the masses of the people. Because the wars have not achieved any of the things they had claimed to before, and the propaganda that they launched their war on, which people initially fell for, has all been exposed. So the fact that they use these words actually is a weakness in their system, because you can see through it quite quickly. The talk about democracy and human rights is just talk, right?
Yes, but I think that the reality which you say is it's from in the Western countries, maybe in United States and in Great Britain, but in Poland the propaganda in this war is different. I have impression that in Poland we have the rehabilitation of the Nazi propaganda. We have all this language that maybe it is not official language of the politicians, but something sometimes, for example, Lech Wałęsa, which is the only worker who profited the contra-revolution in Poland. So in one of the interview, he said that the problem is Russia is that there is too many people there. So we need to make Russia that there is only 50 million citizens. So the result of his thinking that 100 million of Russian need to die, and we have in the commentary in internet very ugly commentaries saying that. Repeated all this Nazi propaganda that the Russians we need to kill them. This is not human, and this is dehumanization. So so we see that the pragmatism of the NATO states that in the same war in the western part of the NATO they try to use some democratic, even socialist propaganda to mobilize masses against Russia, and in the Eastern Europe, they utilize the propaganda which are used in the Germany in the time of Hitler.
Well, you unfortunately are right at the sharp end of the mobilization of proxy armies for NATO. And what that means, the reason that they're using Nazi ideology to do that is they're trying to get fighters who feel motivated. It's very hard to fight one side that is feeling motivated and defending its motherland and a very facing an existential threat the way Russia is, and they feel proud of Russia and they feel that they need to defend Russia from this attack. And on the other side, you have Poles, Ukrainians, people who until not that long ago, were fraternal people with Russia and other parts of the Soviet Union and the Eastern European bloc. And you want to motivate them to fight. If you just conscript them, you're not likely to be very successful. So they need as many people as possible in Poland and Ukraine to adopt this supremacist, fascistic ideology. You only have to look at Israel to see how that works. The more you can motivate the entire population with that kind of ideology, the more likely it is they will fight when you want them to, and not just run away at the earliest opportunity or turn their guns, on their officers and their leaders. So, this is part of how NATO grooms its armies. We saw the same thing in the jihadi armies that they sent to Syria. They take poor, disaffected people who've been let down by the system. They give them an ideology to hold them together, a gang to be part of. They give them weapons. They point them at an enemy and tell them these people are supposed to be having a good life. This is how you get a good life. These are the people who are in your way. You're really important. Your gang's really important. Off you go.
Could you say something more about the platform?
Yes, sure. Sorry, I went on a meander. So essentially, it's formed on the basis of recognizing that there's a deep divide and a decay in what passes for the world right now. And the decay is based on revisionism, essentially, on a lack of clear understanding, a lack of Marxist understanding of what imperialism is, and because of that, the lack of understanding of what this war is. And that has led a whole load of communist organizations to characterize the war as an inter-imperialist war, and their platform, therefore, to the workers in their countries and the world is that the workers don't have a side in this war. Both sides fighting each other are as bad as one another, and we just need to somehow get to the socialist revolution. Although what their program is to get to the socialist revolution, none of them says. Now the platform founders and organisers recognise that this war is absolutely pivotal right now. This question of anti-imperialism and of facing up against the US-led NATO imperialist bloc, which is driving the world and trying to escape from its economic crisis and forcing the anti-imperialism, the targeted non-imperialist countries, forcing them ever closer together. This war is of extreme importance to the workers, and it's of extreme importance to workers understand that we have sides we need to win. Right? It's not two sides who are equally aggressive, who are both pursuing colonial aims and ambitions. Russia was not looting the world before this operation started. It's not fighting this war so that it can get a bigger share of imperialist loot in the world. It's fighting to defend itself from being a target of imperialist loot. That's a very different war. If you read Lenin all the way through World War I, he constantly makes this clarification of the difference between just and unjust wars and the kind of wars that workers have to side with and support. And Leninist analysis of the economies of Russia and the NATO countries, of the motivations of those countries, and what policies they were pursuing before the war, what their aims are in the war, leads you to understand that NATO and the countries grouped around it are an imperialist bloc trying to save their system and their position at the top of the system, and Russia is trying to defend itself from being the next victim of that aggressive bloc. That bloc has made it very clear. It wants to destroy Russia. It wants to do what it did to the Soviet Union in 1991. It wants to have it prostrate on its knees and to be able to freely live wealth and resources of Russia, and it wants to use that as a stepping stone to doing the same thing to China. And only in this way can the imperialist division any way out of a global economic crisis, which at this point is so deep that they are literally teetering. In fact, I would say hurtling towards an abyss from which there is no coming back. What we have to recognise with imperialism today is it is not as it was 100 years ago. At the end of World War I, the imperialists of Europe emerged much. At the end of World War II, the imperialists of Europe would never have survived if it wasn't for the fact that US imperialism was still strong and able to come in and save the day for them. This time around, all the imperialists are huddled together, because none of them are strong enough on their own, apart from the USA, which even it is not strong enough on its own to take on the might of Russia or China or both. And there's no one to come in and save the day for imperialism after. So we're really looking at a very pivotal situation in the world. This is the deepest ever economic crisis. The imperialists are truly desperate. That's all we can do. By seeing the enemy as very strong. If you take a step back and what's happening, in their bid to try to save themselves, they are further weakening their. And unless the USA is really successful in forcing all its junior parts to make the sacrifices while it somehow rebuilds itself, which I don't see, honest with you, to be honest. The decay of the USA is very deep, decades. It's broken on so many levels. I don't see a way if the anti-imperialist bloc sticks together and mobilizes. There's a real opportunity, an historic opportunity to finally, defeat imperialism and unleash the possibility of workers in countries all around the world who are suffering right now to launch a revolutionary wave. That is what's at stake here. It's not just a question of Russia individually, but the whole masses of the world to say, let this crisis be the last one. My God, we've lived through too many already.
The people in the chat all the time are saying about the quality of the sound. So I have one proposition. Could you, this link which I send you, that now you will close all the browsers and you will disconnect from this conversation, and you come again you close this browser and open one more time and come back. Maybe it will be better, because
Sure. Let's try.
so I'm waiting for that. Close all programs which you have, and also the programs which are utilizing the micros, maybe Skype, maybe Discord. If you have some, close all and come back.
Where have you sent me that link? Sorry. Where's the same link I used?
Yeah, the same link, but restart the browser and also close all the programs. Maybe it will be better.
Will do. Sorry.
So, comrades, it's not our fault. Maybe it is the technical problems on the Joti side. Maybe there is a new program, new virus to interrupt the discussion like this. Because in the last times, Joti have a lot of interviews about the anti-imperialist platform, and maybe the imperialists are not happy about this, so they try to interrupt the discussion with Joti Brar. So we are waiting for. If you have some question for Joti, you can ask it here. I prepare a lot of questions, but I don't know if we will continue this conversation with this sound, because it's without sense. Sound quality is very scratchy. It has no as an echo, so pretty much impossible to listen to, unfortunately, since the info is important. Yes, exactly. The info is important. So maybe I will show you the YouTube channel of CPGBML. You can find it in its name, Pluritalian TV. And there is more videos, and fortunately with better quality of sound.
The Vice Chairperson of the Communist Party of Great Britain, Joti Brar. Joti, you're most welcome. So just to put this in context, we have a person training people at an extreme right-wing camp in the UK, in Wales. And now he's fighting in Ukraine and basically being heralded as a type of hero. Are you surprised at that 180 turn by British media when they talk about this person?
Not at all, no. I mean, there's two things that are really important to notice here. Number one is that the British media is really keen to present a narrative that fits with their agenda. Their agenda.
So as you see, the quality of the sound in the other videos is better.
Key to the survival of the imperialist system, because on the one hand they have their huge stores of wealth, which enables them to attract all the rest of the wealth that's in the world anywhere that's part of the global marketplace. But on the other hand, to enable them to take their diktat, that wealth of their money needs to be backed up by the power. Thank you, comrades. So I began my party's contribution to our conference in Caracas 2 months ago by saying that our event was taking place at a time of crucial importance for the world struggle against imperialism. I said then, our struggle is becoming more significant every day because people everywhere are being faced with the hard truth that they simply can't obtain a secure supply of basic necessaries under their present economic conditions, never mind being able to achieve for themselves the peaceful enjoyment of a useful and a fulfilling life. Well, what was true 2 months ago is even truer today. The contradictions of the global capitalist imperialist economic system are becoming deeper every day. The economic crisis is becoming ever more acute and problematical for the imperialist financiers, and as a result, their drive to war is becoming ever more desperate and urgent. Since we last met, we have seen those of us who pay.
Okay, so can you say something?
I'm here. Can you hear me? Is that any better?
Yes, now it's good.
Okay. Well, I've restarted everything, so I'm really sorry about that, comrades.
But okay, so I will remember that it's 36 minutes that the quality of the sound is. So I will read another question which I prepared. I would like to ask about your assessment of the Greek Communist Party and its attitude towards this war. At the beginning, I would like to say that for many years I have been a great fan of this party, which is probably the only one in NATO countries that refers to the traditions of the USSR and Comrade Stalin, and at the same time has real contacts with Greek workers, which in turn makes it a party present in a Greek parliament. How is it that this party, which in the past fought against the Greek fascists supported by British American imperialism, today takes the wrong stand against the Ukrainian fascists supported by the same British American imperialism?
That's an excellent question, Comrade Michael. I mean, I'm not an expert on the history of the KKE. I have spent much time with people who are and listened, and I can only give you a very brief summation of some of the things that we should understand. But really, you know, one cannot judge a party by its past only. Of course, context is really important. But if you look at the history of the Greek Communist Party since the Greek Revolution was suppressed, it's been ideologically, it's been very up and down. So the Greek Communist Party, as all of the parties that were part of the revisionist bloc, which allied itself to the revisionist Soviet Union through the 60s, 70s, and 80s, they embraced perestroika, right? You know, so the idea that this is a party which has had a revolutionary ideology non-stop since the 1920s or whatever, this is incorrect. This is not true. Now, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Greek Communist Party, the KKE, they did eventually make an assessment of the fall of the Soviet Union, which our party welcomed. It had some very good information in it. In fact, all of that information that was good had already been published in my father's book on perestroika, which was never acknowledged by the KKE, that this really important work exists and that actually still, in all this time, no one's done anything better on the causes of the collapse of the Soviet Union. Nevertheless, we said, great, the KKE is making a turn away from revisionism and trying to go back to its revolutionary roots. But to be honest with you, beyond having made this official declaration and, you know, set out its stall to kind of re-embrace Stalin. Now, let's remember that, you know, Stalin was attacked by the revisionists as a veiled way of attacking Lenin. You know, they pretend in the name of Lenin they all attacked Stalin, but really they were attacking socialism. They were attacking the planned economy, right? They were attacking Marxism in practice when they attacked Stalin. And throughout that period, people like us defended Stalin because we recognize what's really under attack here, as well as the fact that Stalin's leadership, of course, and the traditions and everything that was achieved by the Soviet Union during the time of Stalin's leadership is so seminal and important, and his leadership was so brilliant and so pivotal in those achievements and have to be defended. But we understood as well what was at stake for our movement. If you demoralize the working class and tell them that Stalin did everything wrong, I mean, you know, it's not an accident that when Khrushchev made his secret speech in 1956, that was broadcast not in the Soviet Union, but around the world, something like a half of the world communist movement was demobilized in the space of a year. It was such a demoralizing effect on people because they believed Khrushchev as the leader of the Soviet Union. They believed he was a good, honest Marxist. And when he said all these terrible things about Stalin, people believed them and they were demoralized. Right? They thought they'd been following the wrong thing. And it had a huge impact from which our movement has, frankly, never recovered. Right? Not till this day. We're still trying to recover from all of that. The KKE was a party which stuck with the Soviet Union all through its revisionist period. It embraced perestroika, as I said. It was alongside all the Euro-communist parties during the 1980s, which were really destroying communism in Western Europe. It made this assessment that seemed to be a turn for the better in I think the very end of the 1990s. You might remember better than me the dates for those things. But it seems to me it's like a form and content thing. You know, the masses are starting to realize they've been duped, they've been tricked. So you come out with a statement that says, oh, actually, we're all in favor of Comrade Stalin again. And you put Comrade Stalin's pictures on your wall, even as you continue to undermine what Comrade Stalin stood for. What was Comrade Stalin ultimately, except a really, really good Marxist-Leninist? He always called himself, you know, the faithful pupil of Lenin. And, you know, that is how you can characterize what Stalin was, what he stood for, how he worked, the ideology that he represented and implemented in the USSR. It was Leninism, right? And he was a very, very good, determined, steadfast pupil of Lenin. So we've had this thing of, you know, and we see it increasingly now, all kinds of people who like the idea of communism are now in favor of Stalin, but a Stalin where the content's taken out. They just like the picture. They like some of the iconography of socialism from the time of the Soviet Union. But the real substance of the class struggle and the class lines and the anti-imperialism that Comrade Stalin, like Comrade Lenin, represented are disappeared. For example, let me give you one example of the ways in which, you know, the KKE is characterizing itself as a party that's against revisionism and that upholds Stalin and the Soviet Union, doesn't match up to reality. In the theory that they have elaborated to justify the positions that they're taking, which is essentially a position of saying this is an inter-imperialist war, they have redefined what imperialism is, and they've called it a pyramid. They've said, well, the whole capitalist world is in the imperialist phase. And what that means is, they say, every capitalist country is at some level of imperialism, higher or lower. And yes, they fight amongst themselves for preeminence, but essentially they're all part of this pyramid of imperialism. That's what they call it. So, and in one of the documents where the KKE was pushing this line at international seminars, and you can just imagine the type of seminar, right, where a bunch of paid international officers go and listen to each other drone on, and, you know, they surround they their contributions with Leninist phrases to reassure one another what good revolutionaries they are. And then they have a nice dinner and go home, right? At this type of conference, the KKE took some of their documents that they've written about their imperialist pyramid theory, and you can see how well they smuggled some really bad ideas into the movement in a way where nobody noticed, because very long documents that basically 90% of it says nothing, but kind of repeats Leninist phrases that kind of lull you to sleep or into a false sense of security that these are good Marxist scientists. But actually, they're mostly non sequiturs. And then right in the middle, there'll be a phrase like this. It's hidden in a sentence, and it's gone past without a word of explanation. In one of these documents is the phrase, the so-called national question, and they put quotes around it. Now, they don't explain why Lenin and Stalin and the Bolsheviks, and in fact, every communist since 1905 or whatever, conception of the national question is no longer valid. They don't say why the national question is now a so-called question. They don't explain how that's all become defunct and is no longer a question, despite the fact if you look at the world today, it's very clearly divided between, even, is it Josip Borrell talked about the golden billion? Was it him? Anyway, they have this thing. Clearly there's a divide between the countries, the small handful of countries which are looting the rest of the globe, and the position that the rest of the world finds itself in, no matter what its social system, because of the looting of its resources by the imperialist countries and the inability of so many countries to get on top of that situation, no matter how hard they try, because the military might backs up the economic might of the imperialists and comes and suppresses it. It puts down revolutions in blood. It bribes or assassinates, elected leaders, that the people, whatever method people use to try to become sovereign and independent, they find imperialism's got an answer to them. Well, the KKE hasn't explained how all of that has gone away. They say any country that has a bit of capitalism in its economy is a capitalist economy, and any capitalist economy in the modern period, because the period is imperialist, is also an imperialist economy, right? This is absolute nonsense. It doesn't help anybody understand the world. Quite the reverse. It confuses people and it demoralizes people, and it leaves the people, the communists, who should be the ones at the absolute forefront of the anti-imperialist struggle, and therefore the forefront of the anti-war, anti-NATO movement. It puts those people on the side, saying, oh, this struggle is nothing to do with me, a plague on both your houses. This is a reinvention of Trotskyism, in fact.
I think that when we talk about Trotsky, that we have two periods of the career of Trotsky. The first one is before October Revolution, that he was one of the Marxist theoreticians who nobody cared what he wrote. But in the 1930s, when he was the emigrant from the Soviet Union, the biggest publishing house in the United States, France, and other imperialist countries published the books of Trotsky, because he is the guy who knows the truth about Stalin. And for me, it is something very, very strange when the imperialists are inviting the Marxists to media, they print their books. They are not stupid. They are doing some reasons, and why they ignored Trotsky before October Revolution and promote them in the time when he criticized Soviet Union. It's explaining many things, but. For the question of, I know that the history of the Greek Communist Party and all the history of the communist parties in the Europe is very complicated, but I see big difference between the Greek Communist Party and the other parties in Europe in the time of the contre-revolution in Soviet Union, the biggest parties in Europe, like French Communist parties, Italian Communist Party are disappeared. They changed the name, that now we are not communist, we are Democratic Party or something like this. And it's the most of these parties became a very, very weak party. This was the party which, in the time of the after Second World War, have thousands, hundreds of thousands of members, even millions members, and the popularity of the French Communist Party or Italian Communist Party after the Second World War was very, very strong. And in the time of the crash of the Soviet Union, they became very, very weak. The Greek Communist Party is a little different. That we need to admit that maybe they have some problems, but it became strong political force in Greece. And in the time, in the last years, especially in the time when the economic crisis in Greece started 15 years ago, and we have all this history of the conflict between Greece and Troika, and they pushed Greece to destroy this economy, and to also to that there was a lot of attacks against the working class in Greece. I think that the Greek Communist Party make a good position, that they fight against this. So it is something which now is, for me, it's shocking that I promoted this party in the past, and now I see that they are doing, they are promoting this. They are continue this NATO propaganda to attack Putin, because it's very easy living in the NATO country and writing articles that the Putin is bad. But it's if you are courageous, attack your own bourgeoisie and NATO.
I would come back a little bit on your assessment of the KKE's leadership during the time of the Troika and the referendum on the EU membership and all of those. Or, well, it wasn't on membership, was it? It was on the acceptance of the bailout package. That whole period was really one which revealed, I think, a weakness in the KK's leadership, because it did have great sway amongst the masses. It was in a position to really be very influential during that campaign. And essentially, it kind of sat on its hands and sat on the side. And as it's doing now, it did a kind of plague on both your houses. So we see already this idea, this quite Trotskyist idea, that the working class has no allies and must make no temporary agreements with any party that's not a socialist party, because you'll get your hands dirty. They justify not struggling against the EU right now by saying it makes no difference to the Greeks who they're exploited by, right? This is very Trotskyist. Now, the reality is anything that weakens the European Union is weakening imperialism, and anything that weakens imperialism is good for the struggle of workers everywhere. It might not solve our problems of exploitation today, but it's, you know, these are steps along the way to creating a situation in which we can have a successful revolution, right? When you live in the imperialist region, which unfortunately the Greeks do, you know, they live inside the European Union, and the domination of the imperialists is very strong there, and they've been able to buy social peace in many ways in many of the imperialist countries. You know, the conditions for revolution are made difficult by the way that imperialism operates at home, by the way it buys off big sections of the population, especially the leaderships of our movements, of the trade union movement, of the communist movement, of the socialist movement, the anti-imperialist movement. So say all these leaders are very often bought off. This is something that Lenin described back at the time of World War I. you know, and they're able to do that, the imperialists, because they're looting the world, and they have bringing so much wealth back home. They can use some of it to buy a little social peace and to buy off the leaderships of various movements. So the idea that engaging in any struggle that weakens imperialism is pointless because there'll still be capitalist exploitation at the end of it is a profoundly un-Leninist point of view. But essentially, that is the position that the KKE takes in regards to the European Union. On the other hand, you know, they say, oh, look at us, we're the most active party against the war in the EU. And they sort of back this up by showing you every now and again a photo of a few of their members throwing paint at a tank or something else like that that's happening in NATO. Okay, they've organised a few protests in Greece against NATO. They've equally organised protests against the Russian embassy, and they claim that as a good Leninist, you know, we're opposing both sides. But the truth is, Russia is a NATO member. The KKE is a mass party. A mass party, it's not a party like my party that has almost no connection with the masses. We're always being rebuked for that. How dare you speak to us about anything when you're so small and you've got no history of achieving anything? Well, okay, you know, it's true. We're a small party, but we try to understand Leninism and tell the truth to people so that we can lay the foundations, such as they are, for the better conditions in Britain and help workers understand the enemy they're facing. KKE, on the other hand, has a mass base. It has influence amongst the working class, has ability to speak to people and, you know, a huge media network and all the rest of it. How is it really? It says it opposes NATO. Okay. Is the most a party like that can do against its own country's activities in this war, is the most they can do to organise a couple of protests and throw some paint at some tanks? I don't think so. Where's their campaign of mass non-cooperation? Where is it that they're physically stopping those tanks from getting over the border? Where is it that they're disrupting the activities of the NATO bases, using their seats in parliament to call on the country to refuse to move any material, the whole country? Where are they calling in the trade union movement to stop all cooperation with every aspect of the war? The Greeks could do a huge amount if they had that kind of leadership. They don't have it. The idea that the KKE opposes NATO is purely tokenistic. Their main work is opposing Russia. They're pushing the propaganda. They're organising demonstrations outside the Russian embassy in Greece. How is Russia the enemy of the Greek people? You know, that's insanity.
Okay, so I jump to another question. I would like to ask about your assessment of the transgender issue, and specifically, I would like to ask why so many Marxist circles in NATO countries and even Cuba today deny biology and material reality and believe that it is our consciousness that determines our gender. Socialism is an ideology that has always assumed that the working class can only win if united as one strong collective. Meanwhile, the issue of trans and other identity issues is the promotion of individualism and the attempt to connect the rainbow flag with the labor movement ends in fragmentation and breakdown of working class unity. Why did so many Marxists, especially from the UK, include this problem in their programs?
Very good question. I mean, to be honest with you, the pressure to include trans liberation, as they call it, the gay liberation, all of these things as platform points in a Marxist program has come from the bourgeoisie and has been succumbed to by every party that doesn't value Marxist theory, because if you don't have strong ideological defenses, you don't have the ability to withstand the kind of propaganda onslaught we have had in the West on these issues. So they've been building up these approaches to various types of identity politics via academia in particular for decades. And as the economic crisis has been getting worse, they've been ramping that up to really quite hysterical levels. There's quite a few questions that are kind of mixed in together when you look specifically at the transgender question. And, you know, I think it's really important to separate them out. So when you look at the young people, overwhelming, when we're talking about kids going through puberty and having a huge distress as they do, and not knowing what to do about that, and because of the social breakdown of society, when young people are going through puberty and feeling really overwhelmed by the emotions and what comes with that, and they, at the same time, they're sort of kicking against their parents, because that's a kind of natural part of going from a child to an adult, is the teenage years. You sort of push back against your parents' authority and wisdom. That's natural. But of course, in a functioning community, pushing against your parents doesn't leave you floating free. You're surrounded by a community that can support you while you go through that process. The problem with our society is those kids who push against their parents find themselves free-floating, untethered in a scary, weird, overwhelming world that they're not equipped to deal with. They don't have the support to go through this process in a natural way, and they have the internet marketing at them. Now, so what we're basically seeing is a social disease. You know, the distress of these young people is horrific. You know, I don't blame, you know, pubescent kids from feeling terrible as they go through puberty. They're awakening in the West into a dark and scary world. Most of them have the internet in their pockets, which is full of the most horrific imagery that they are not ready to see or understand, or to really to deal with properly. They don't have a supportive social structure to help them through this critical period of development in their lives. And instead, they're being subjected by a medical pharmaceutical industry, which has created a product for these kids and is being so aggressively marketed at them. And our state machineries in the West have been transformed into marketing machines to push this further. So it's become, you know, any parent who questions, or any adult who questions whether it's right to tell a child who's finding puberty difficult that the reason they're finding it difficult is not because society is broken down and not giving them the support they need, but there's something wrong with them. It's your personal internal problem. Any adult who questions that is immediately vilified. They can lose their jobs if they work in the state sector. They're told that they're guilty of anything from nastiness to some kind of phobia to fascism, right? And that they mustn't be allowed to be anywhere near anybody. And there's this huge campaign of marketing. Actually, if we take a step, you know, it's selling a product. The product is a lie. The kids, so many of the kids who go through this end up 10 years later looking back and saying, I was too young to take that decision. I didn't know what it meant. I've mutilated my body for life now, and I have to live with the consequences. I've been essentially neutered and sterilized, and I didn't know what all of that meant. And now I look back and realize it was a mistake, and all the people who pushed me along that road, you know, shouldn't have been allowed to do it. This whole machinery of pushing kids onto the sausage factory of, you know, turning boys into girls and girls into boys. They don't really do that, right? Onto this, down this pathway, they are creating profits for the medical pharmaceutical industry, and simultaneously, they are encouraging what you identified there as this hyper-individualism, which is, you know, that's the world that these kids have grown up in. They don't even understand that community is what they're lacking. They've never known it. You know, but the reality is it's a social issue. Gender dysphoria is a social disease, and the only solution is going to be a social one. Meanwhile, the medical pharmacological industry has created a machinery for mutilating our children, which is in the best traditions of Dr. Mengele. When we look back at this period and what has been allowed to be done in the interest of the profits of these companies against, you know, ordinary kids who are just in pain because they're not getting what they need to develop in a healthy way, we will be truly shocked, I think. It's the most inhumane, horrific phenomenon. But this idea that problems in society become internalized and individualized is one, of course, the imperialists are very keen to push. You're right. They understand what too many of us have forgotten. Our strength is our unity. So they need us to be broken down and atomized into individual consumption units who don't understand one another, can't communicate with one another, don't have time to support one another, don't have meaningful connections and bases with one another, can be made to feel anxious and lonely and just, you know, stay at home and consume, go to work, come back home and consume, and don't have meaningful supportive connections with one another, you know. And there are various ways in which these ideologies are pushed into our movement, and the ideology, not the poor suffering kids who are chucked onto the sausage machine of the, you know, transgender medical machine, but the ideology that goes alongside it as its kind of marketing campaign. This ideology, you are right, is profoundly anti-worker. It is profoundly anti-Marxian, profoundly anti-historical, profoundly anti-materialist. It's the ultimate idealism. You identified it yourself when you asked the question. You know, this idea is super dangerous to working class people because Marxism is the philosophy of our liberation. It's the weapon for our liberation. It's the means by which we understand the world. And it is based in materialism. Not mechanical, crude materialism, but dialectical materialism, which understands that the world is real, fundamentally, that our ideas come from reflections and senses of the world, that they don't just spring from the air. It's not that the idea is there and then the reality comes. First there's material reality, then there's the reflection of that reality in our senses and in our brains. And then there, of course, there's an interaction between those things, but matter is primary. Matter came first. Matter exists. If I die tomorrow and my ideas die, the world that I have seen and experienced is still going on, still existing, right? It was there before, it will be there afterwards. And this idea that you are what you think you are, you have to have a really, you know, in this world, you have to have a very strong ability, a big machinery of confusion to make people buy into this idea. It's very noticeable that actually it's more likely that you've been through more rungs of the bourgeois educational establishment to buy into the idea that a boy is a girl because he thinks he is, or a girl is a boy because she thinks she is, right? For most people, it's common sense, i.e., I can tell it's perceived reality, that nothing you can do to a boy in the way of hormones and sterilization will turn that boy into a girl. You can mutilate that boy. You can sterilize that boy. You can make that boy seem a little bit hybrid and odd. What you can't do is turn that boy into a girl, because the programming that nature put into that body at the time of conception is in every cell of that body. It's in every mechanism by which that body works. And the crude interventions of drugs and surgeries don't come anywhere close to changing that. And so the wish, the massive desire of a teenager to switch bodies because he's been convinced by a marketing campaign that will stop the pain he's feeling. That desire that he's then sold a product to fulfill, you know, will make you into a boy. It's a lie. But the idea that we've all been pushed, you know, particularly in the West, it's been pushed on us so hard that, if they feel they're a boy, they are one. It doesn't matter what all your senses tell you and what all their biology tells you. If they think they are one, they are. And if you deny the understanding of your senses, right down to, you know, the part of your senses that smells the pheromones that come off somebody and knows, I know you're a boy. It doesn't matter what clothes you wear. It doesn't matter how short your hair is. It doesn't matter if you've locked your breasts off. I know, because many of the senses that I'm not even aware of, many mechanisms in my body recognize the mechanisms in your body, right? That underneath my conscious mind, there's all kinds of activities going on that I'm not particularly aware of, but they act together, you know, to let me know this information. Telling people that they must not listen to their senses, to material reality, that they can override it with this weird idealist thinking. It's very, very dangerous for our movement because it's so anti-Marxism, and it essentially stops us from being able to embrace Marxism, which is the science of working class liberation.
I am agree 100% with you. And could you say some? Could you do one more time this what you do? What did before? Because the problem with sound come back. So.
Oh God, I don't know. What did I do?
I don't know. Reset the browser and come back because the last 5 minutes there is one more time the problem with sounds. Not like the it's the first time in here.
You're losing my sound.
Again. Yes.
So
you need to close browser. Do the same thing which you already did, because it works.
I've got to make a suggestion. Is it possible for me to join this stream without having to log in via Google or Facebook?
I don't know. I think that in this program it's not.
No, when I've logged in with other people, I don't have to do that. That's putting a barrier between me and you. I'm worried about. I don't usually have to go via Facebook or via Google.
Maybe I will try to. There is the yes. I know. Yes, I know what. I need to.
So I'll go out and close down my browser.
Yes. I will read this question now. So when the Joti is not here live. And my sound is also bad. When I am the quality of my sound is good or not?
Thank you, comrades. I bring fraternal greetings from the Communists of Britain. We are most enthused to see the vital role being played by your party all over South Korea at the heart of your people's ongoing struggle for national liberation. Living in an imperialist country means that the conditions in which my party struggles are significantly different from yours. But we share with you the pressing need to free our people from the rapacious demands of finance capital, which plunders the globe and immiserates the masses. Hello.
Hello.
Is it better?
Yes, it's better. It's the old Soviet technology. When something is not working, we need to switch.
Turn it off and turn it on again.
Yes. There is the question from chat: which would be the most accurate recommended biography on Stalin to read, if there is one? Thank you.
It's a good question. I mean, you get different things from different biographies. I personally really like Ian Gray's biography. Was it Man of History? I think Stalin. I think it's Man of History. There's a couple of nice Soviet ones, but they do tend to be I mean, potentially not have the type of content that you're looking for. A lot of people enjoy or get a lot out of reading Deutsch's biography of Stalin, which is quite long. I think there's 3 volumes. He was a Trotskyite. He doesn't like Stalin, and yet he is constantly forced to admit how what a great leader Stalin was, what a strong person he comes out as, you know. So despite the fact that he's trying to make Trotsky look good and Stalin look bad, he sort of, I would say, ends up achieving the opposite. So those are possibilities. It's not a biography, but in terms of analysis of the leadership and the achievements of the era during Stalin, I would recommend Ludo Martin's book, Another View of Stalin, and also Joti Brar's book, Trotskyism or Leninism, which covers a lot of the same issues. Very important, you know, more important than a biography, I think, is an evaluation of the politics and what they mean. You know, the bourgeois history is really big on, you know, people's personal stories and, you know, trying to tell you that it's all about their personality is what makes history. And, you know, World War II would never have happened if Hitler was like this or like that, or had done better at art, or, you know, had been or hadn't been a better vegetarian. But really, it's the politics you need to understand much more than the person, I think.
For this question, I can recommend the French publishing houses. It's named Delga. The people who are in these publishing houses, they are also the member of the PCRF. PCRF is the Pôle de Renaissance Communiste en France, is the one of the organization which is part of the Anti-Imperialist Platform. So the books are in French, but you can look for the authors and the titles, and there is a lot of books about this subject, which if you try to find the interesting books about the history of the Soviet Union, you will not be disappointed in this publishing house. They recently, for example, no, I will not. Okay, so I prepared one more question. Now I would like to. So far, I have touched on topics I knew we agreed on. Therefore, I would like to conclude with a topic on which we seem to have opposing views. It's about Scottish independence. As an opponent of imperialism, I support all anti-imperialist forces in the world because I believe that the stronger they are, the worse for imperialism. That is why I condemn the separatism of Taiwan, Xinjiang, Tibet, and Hong Kong. For the same reason, I support separatism in NATO countries, and I think the world would be very happy if United Kingdom were broken up into many small states such as Scotland, Wales, Gibraltar, Falkland Island, etc. Scottish independence weakens British imperialism, and therefore I do not understand why George Galloway, whom I respect very much, is an opponent of an independent Scotland. Do you support George in this matter?
I am aligned with George on this matter. We have our own analysis about the Scottish national question. You know, it's not the Marxist position that you support every independence movement everywhere, no matter what. So the breaking up of the proletariat, it's not only the ruling class that gets broken up when states become smaller, it's also the working class. And we actually don't want the working class to be broken up. We want the working class to be in as large a group as possible to be able to fight effectively. Now, when it comes to the history of Britain, one has to understand that Scotland was never an independent bourgeois nation. Up until the time when Scotland and England and Wales were unified in 1701 or 1703, somewhere around there, under the Act of Union, Scotland was a feudal state with a feudal king, feudal lords, you know, feudal warring, you know, everything that goes with feudalism. But if you understand the national question from a Marxist point of view, a feudal kingdom is not a nation. A nation is a modern bourgeois formation. So there's no history of an independent nation in Scotland. Moreover, so Scotland's bourgeois state developed very quickly after the Act of Union in cooperation with the English bourgeoisie. They created a British capitalist bourgeois state, the better to go forth and plunder the world. The British, the Scottish bourgeois and the Scottish proletarians benefited from British imperialism right from the get-go. Many Scottish workers were, you know, served in the British Army, and many Scottish settlers were sent to Ireland to become a supremacist population that was ensuring British rule in Ulster and all the rest of it. Many Scottish bourgeois were right at the forefront of running British imperialism. We've had many Scottish prime ministers, for example, in Britain. They were at the forefront of administering and conquering India. Scotland is part of Britain. So the modern bourgeois nation is Britain. It's not Wales, it's not England, it's not Scotland. These are historical parts of Britain. Ireland is a different question. Ireland was colonised by Britain. The Irish bourgeoisie was suppressed as part of that colonisation. The development of Irish capitalism was suppressed as part of that colonisation. Ireland was kept as a source of cheap immigrant labour and a source of cheap raw materials, cheap agricultural produce to fuel British imperialist development, industrial expansion, etc., etc. So the relationship between Britain and Ireland is not the same as the relationship between Scotland and England. So we demand the right of secession and self-determination for all the people of Ireland, yes, and the reunification of the Irish nation, which historically is one. It's on the whole island of Ireland. Of course, you know, the other side of that is, you know, we hope very much that there'll be a future time where there's a voluntary union between Britain and Ireland in a socialist style in order to make a better socialist state. But that's for the future. For now, if the Irish people want to secede from Britain, they should do so without any more interference. The occupation of the north of Ireland should be ended, and the Irish people should determine their own affairs by themselves. That's the Marxist approach to the national question. When it comes to Scotland, our evaluation is there is no national question in Scotland. It's entirely a bourgeois construct to encourage Scottish workers to blame the English instead of capitalism for their problems. Their problems are the problems of capitalism, not the problems of national oppression. Yes, there's poverty amongst workers in every part of Britain, not particularly in Scotland. And the Scottish bourgeoisie is not an oppressed bourgeoisie. So there is no question of Scotland being either a nation or an oppressed nation. And therefore, as a Marxist, we will not call for its breakup. Now, this argument that British imperialism would be weakened by breaking up Britain is one which has been advanced by many people, and it sounds sort of revolutionary, but it doesn't really stand up to scrutiny. Because if you look at the programme of Scottish nationalism in practice, they have said that they would keep the Queen, keep their part in the army, keep their part in NATO, keep the pound probably, right? Keep membership of European Union. So in what way is British imperialism really going to be inconvenienced? No, the whole programme of Scottish nationalism is to keep workers on either side of this fake border blaming one another. And if there was to be a successful Scottish liberation movement, what it would mean would be a race to the bottom between English and Scottish workers in terms of their pay and condition. It would make them easier to exploit and easier to mobilise against one another. In practice, the British bourgeoisie would carry on business as usual, and it's made that very clear. I actually don't think it's something that's likely to come to fruition. It's just something they keep boiling to keep the resentments of workers channeled away from the true source of their problems, which is the whole capitalist system, and to keep the workers on our island divided from one another.
You know, I think that the separatism in the United Kingdom, it's not a way which making the socialism in Britain closer. I am talking this only because in the world there was in the history and a lot of revolutions and the progressive countries, and the British imperialism make a lot of work to destroy this. So when the strong Britain imperialism, when the Britain imperialism is strong, it's a danger for the workers from the Russia, from Libya, from Syria, from Afghanistan, Iraq, and I can continue this list. The strategy of imperialism before, it was the conquering countries and occupy these countries. Now they are too weak to occupy other countries. Now they are trying to organize the war, the endless war, like in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Libya. The war continue in Afghanistan. It started in 1980s, and there is until now there is all the time a problem. So when the British imperialists, they organize the civil wars in other countries, my only hope is to organize something like civil war in the Britain Island. Of course, it will be not good for the British workers. It will be, but it will this chaos and the problems, all these problems which the British imperialists created in other countries. I think that some kind of justice is that we can organize the same thing in your country, and in the same reason I supported all the separatism in the United States. I supported the Indian law to independent, the Latinos, the one state against another state. More there will be fight there. The US bases and the armies, which is in all the world, will be occupying their own problem, not the problem of the liberation of the other. So it is my perspective, and I don't care it's there exists national question or Scotland or not exists, there exists language of Scottish language or not. The only reason is that when there will be civil war in Britain, maybe there will be easier to fight imperialism in other parts of the world.
So you're right to identify the need for the British working class to be creating civil war at home that stops our ruling class from being able to pillage the world. Absolutely, that is the duty of the British working class movement, that's for sure. But to wish on the British workers the kind of fratricidal warfare you're talking about, which is only destructive and not in any way positive, that is actually the kind of warfare that our rulers want too. They're happy. They want us fighting one another all the time. There will be their justification for a stronger state. For a stronger state. It will keep us weak. That's why they promote these ideologies so consistently and persistently. The ideology of Scottish nationalism has been created, nurtured, and promoted by the British bourgeoisie. That's what you have to understand, that I think perhaps, Michal, you haven't understood, is when you support that, you're supporting something that British imperialism has created and nurtured on purpose to weaken the unity of British working people. And the more that we've had, what do they call it? I forgot the word for when they're creating these local parliaments and devolving more powers into the areas. The more of this devolution that we've had into Scottish and Welsh parliaments and local differences in conditions between workers in different parts of Britain, the more divided, less united as a population we've become. We're less able to fight to defend, for example, our National Health Service, which is being totally destroyed in front of us, but it's being done at different rates in different ways in different parts of the country. And so we don't have one unified fight. The ideology and the leaders, as I said, are promoted by imperialism because their system is in crisis. The workers are becoming angry with the deterioration in their conditions, and the ruling class wants them fighting one another. Now, you've essentially said you want the workers here fighting one another too, but that's an imperialist agenda. What we need is not the workers fighting one another, but the workers fighting the state. And what you're supporting won't result in that, right? So we have to recognize that under the program of Scottish nationalism, it's the workers who'll be weaker, not finance capital, right? So yes, you're right that civil war is needed, but the idea of you support any type of separation because it's a kind of revenge attack, or it's wishful thinking that this movement is going to lead to the weakening of imperialism. It's going to lead to the further weakening of the British working class movement. You know, we desperately need workers all over Britain to understand their commonality and not their differences. You know, these differences are artificial. And it's absolutely anti-Leninist to call for the dissolution of states for no particular reason. Doesn't matter where you're standing in the world or how you feel about the state in question. You know, it doesn't make any sense. We need to bring workers, you know, for example, you know, what has come to the people of Yugoslavia and the populations of Yugoslavia since that country has been, you know, re-balkanized and turned into lots of little groups that all, you know, feel that their identities are in fighting one another. You know, this is poison to our movement. You know, fundamentally, we're fighting on different sides of the world, parts of the world. We're fighting the same struggle to bring workers back together, and to artificially divide them unnecessarily is absolutely the wrong thing to be doing. And it doesn't weaken. If we want to weaken our enemies, we need to be looking at weakening their alliances. Yes, everything we can do to weaken the the European Union, everything we can do to weaken NATO, everything we can do to undermine the foundations of the agreements they make amongst themselves in order to loot the world, everything we can do to help countries break free of the oppression and exploitation of the imperialist countries. These are the ways we cut the ground out from underneath imperialism's feet. And yes, everything we can do to bring the workers together inside the imperialist countries to wage war on our class enemies, yes, we need to support, but not the breakup of nations that are historically constituted. That doesn't make any sense.
No, my position is that the better solution is that the Communist Party, Great Britain, Marxist-Leninists organize the workers' revolution in Britain next month, take power and build socialism. It's the better. But when we watch the history of the working class in Britain, it started 200 years ago. And it is one of the without success because I think that the bourgeoisie in British bourgeoisie is very strong and very well organized to destroy the unity of the revolutionary movement in Britain. So if we can have this victory of the socialism, now we need to think about the situation now in the world, that this situation in the war in Ukraine, which is now the workers from Donbass and the workers from Kiev 10 years ago, they were one nation, they were collaborated, maybe they were friends and they lived together, but because of the active involvement of the imperialists and especially imperialists, Anglo-Saxon imperialists, these people who lived together became enemies. And the example of the Yugoslavia, which you said, it's the same example, that they organized this civil war elsewhere to destroy these countries, and Yugoslavia had a lot of successes to organize some kind of anti-imperialist movement in 1960s or 50s, 60s in the time of Tito. Of course, this is a different conversation who was Tito, and but I prefer the United Yugoslavia socialist in the time of Tito that the civil war in Yugoslavia in 1990s, and this war continued because all the time they try to open new front in the Kosovo against Serbia. But I can say that the time when you will take power in Britain, I will be good friend of the United Socialist Britain, and I will be for maximum that you are strong with Scotland, with Wales, because when it is socialist, it's good, but when it is imperialist, we need to thinking how to destroy this, and this all the time is the question: unity or individual small things, and destroying not only for this Wales, Scotland, but it's better to return to the time of the Middle Ages, where every city were independent, and big house, big war. It will be better for the colonial countries.
I think, Michal, actually, this is coming from a mindset of defeatism. You know, that we've spent so long feeling like Western imperialism is so bloody strong, and there's no, you know, they find a way to subvert every movement, and you know they're going around the world, you know, making mayhem and destroying the lives and the countries of so many people, and you know but it almost, not only it feels sort of like defeatism, but almost like a kind of well, you have that then, but it's on the workers that you're wishing to make your revenge, which is upside down, really. You know, the reality is that the situation we're in right now is, you know, what we described earlier. The imperialist system is in a deep crisis, and as its crisis has been progressing over the last decades, it has already created a lot of what you're asking. You're wanting British society to become atomized and polarized and infighting. That's been achieved, actually, to a great extent. And that is the enemy of the progress of the working class movement. The reason the working class movement is so unable to keep the ruling class occupied at home right now, despite the fact that there's huge pressure on our living conditions. We're facing a massive inflation crisis. We're facing a huge disruption to and degradation of our living conditions here. And there's large popular anger against that, but there's no organized decent leadership or decent movement that's able to really fight back, precisely because the ruling class has been atomizing the working class here for such a long time that it's pretty defenseless. So what you're calling for is more atomization of the working class. What you would create would not atomize the ruling class, which is actually the thing that you're aiming for. Now, what we are doing with the platform is saying, this is our opportunity to bring together all the forces against imperialism, unite them together to actually atomize the imperialists and unite the workers, right? That's the program that we need. This is a situation that's creating that possibility in every country all over the world and worldwide. Russia and China and North Korea are at the front of that militarily, but they need a huge movement from everywhere else to support that and understand which side of this conflict we are on.
Okay, I will read two questions from chat before finish. Firstly, thoughts on Grover for work?
Yeah, it's great. It's really nice that someone like Grover has had the time and the ability to go back through the Soviet archive and prove a lot of things that, you know, were already in documents that communists studied and were happy to rely on from the period of Lenin and Stalin regarding what was going on in the Soviet Union, but, you know, have been called into question by all kinds of border academics for such a long time that many people in the world now see the Bolshevik sources as unreliable, right? So it's not good enough to just read the transcripts of the trials of the liquidators and such during the time of the purges, for example, before World War II. You can't trust those sources. So the fact that Grover's come and taken for, I mean, the one that always stands out to me in particular is the way that he took Khrushchev's speech, the secret speech from 1956 to the 20th Party Congress of the Soviet Union, Communist Party of the Soviet Union Bolshevik. He took that secret speech, which, as I said earlier, demobilized half of the world's communist movement in 1950s. And he subjected it to an analysis, a proper analysis. There was some, I can't remember how many claims are in the speech, but he took each one by one. He went to the archive and said, is there evidence for this? And what he found was that every single one of those statements were lies. And I remember him telling me, it was quite funny. He said, you know, it makes my book much harder to promote. He said, if I'd have found that 2 or 3 of them were true, that would have been a much better sell. It would make me look like a better academic. But I've told the truth of what I found. The evidence is every single one of those claims that Khrushchev made was a lie. And therefore, that's what I've published. But of course, now I'm dismissed as just being a Stalin apologist because I've told the truth. And the truth exonerates Stalin entirely from all the lies of Khrushchev. And of course, the reason that Khrushchev was able to make all these lies was he essentially was resuscitating all the claims of Trotsky in the period between the Bolshevik Revolution and the Second World War.
Here is my conversation with Grover Furr, which I made a few months ago. And I would like to say that with Monika Karbowska, the Polish comrade who lived like me in France, she found the very interesting information about she is a specialist of the history of de Gaulle. She wanted to wrote the PhD about the relations of the France in the time of de Gaulle and the socialist Poland. And because she wrote a lot of memoirs of the people who collaborated with de Gaulle, she found it very important information that there was a lot of militaries which are captured in 1940, and they were sent to the German prisons, and 200 of them they escaped. They were in the border with Soviet Union. They escaped, and they were in Soviet Union in April and May 1940. They were when they escaped, and when they 1941. April, May 1941. And they were arrested by the NKVD, and after they were sent to the place near Smolensk, and in this time they have contact with Polish officers, and they talked with these Polish officers because Polish officers speaking French. And it was very, very important information which we sent to the Grover Furr, because these Polish officers in the official line of the Goebbels died in March 1940. But these French officers, and one of them was a son of de Gaulle. But there is a lot of officers, because after they come back to France, and many of them became very important officers in France, and they lived until 1990s, even to 2000. And they wrote memories that 1 year after Katyn massacre, they talked with the Polish officers, and it is impossible. And it is one of the reasons why de Gaulle never trust of this propaganda of Katyn that it's the Soviet Union who killed the people in 1940, because he knows the people who speaks with these people 1 year later. So I send this information to Grover Furr, and I hope that he will make.
That's great. You know, to be honest with you, the whole Katyn myth was created by the Nazis as a propaganda stunt. This was unmasked and recognized and officially acknowledged by the world at Nuremberg, right?
Yes, of course.
That question, for anybody who has any sense of historical justice or fairness, will understand that this question was settled in 1946, right? And the constant rewriting of it and bringing it back, it is only for propaganda purposes, and no real academic should be taken. No one should be taken seriously as an academic. It doesn't matter how well they write there. And Grover has a brilliant expression for this: propaganda with footnotes. Right? It doesn't matter how well footnoted their propaganda is. This question was settled in 1946, and anyone who is re-raising it now is dishonest. And it's keeping Grover very busy refuting all this rubbish. But it was all finished, as far as I'm concerned, in 1946. I have no problem with the evidence that was presented then. I don't see any reason for any sensible person to be wasting their time on rereading, reams that are produced by these, anti-communists for their propaganda purposes. It's all part of rehabilitating Nazism and burying the Soviet experience, And our job as communists is just to explain that to people. There's a reason they lie to us. We know they lie. I mean, these days it's very, very easy for us to talk to people on this subject because they've become so aware since all of the wars that the imperialists have been launching of just how much they're being lied to all the time on so many subjects. They don't know exactly which is a lie and which is not. They don't know exactly what's motivating each lie, but they know they're being lied to by media, by politicians. The trust now for media and politicians is lower than the trust for estate agents who are traditionally hated, right, in our country. So that really tells you something, and that makes it much easier for us to say, look, they lied to you about lots of things. Why would they not lie to you about the one most important thing of all, which is the possibility for successful class struggle and building of socialism? Of course, they have to lie to us about that. That's their job.
I would like to think that Zelensky in this matter, he make a lot of good job because he lie all the time. And half year ago, there was a story that there was a missile, Ukrainian missile, which hit Poland territory and killed two Polish person. And everybody knew that it was the Ukrainian missile. And they don't have they were not angry to Ukraine. They said, yes, it's a war, it was not voluntary, it was accident, stuff like this. But Zelensky never admitted that it was Ukrainian missile, and all the time he lied that it was the Russian missile and wanted to push Poland against Russia. And there was every day we have example of the Ukrainian propaganda, and now for me it's a lot of easier to speak with Polish people who are not agree with me of the question of the Soviet Union. And now I can explain what is the war propaganda. That look the Ukrainian propaganda. Every day they lied. And do you think that in the time of the Cold War against Soviet Union they didn't lie? And now they are trying. Yes. So I am Zelensky and all his lies because he has no limit. And it is good because it's shown that everything which he say it's lie now. And everything which he said is repeated in the Polish media. And it is scary that in the few there will be in the 3 weeks we will have a big celebration of the 80th anniversary of the Wołyń massacre. It's very important day for the Poland because it's 11 July 1943 when the Banderites killed a lot of Poles, and since many months the Poles are asking Zelensky to excuse for this, and he didn't do this, and he not excuse, but he is pushing to building another monuments, not only Bandera. But Shuchevich was a leader of UPA who was responsible to this genocide of the more than 100,000 Poles in Wołyń, but it's a different question. I will read the last question from chat, and we can. I will liberate you. It's. I hope that that you will come back to our conversation when, because you know, the question which I prepared is before. It's because I heard your discourse a lot, so I know what you are talking, what was your view, and I wanted that you repeat this here because it's very important. How strong is opportunism amongst British working class? Strong.
Yeah, very strong. I mean, you know, we have had, you pointed out yourself, you know, British imperialism is not what it once was, but British imperialism is the oldest of the modern imperialist powers, and therefore very experienced and with a long history of using its colonial plunder to create a section of the working class which is bought and paid off. Now, in the old days, before World War II, that section was relatively a small section, and it was what inspired Lenin to come up with his theory of going lower and deeper to the section of the masses which is not bribed and whose lives are really of miserable poverty. And right up until World War II, you saw that the majority of the British working class wasn't benefiting from the empire. Their children were not getting educated. You know, in the right up to the 1930s, there were working class children in Britain who went hungry and barefoot and lived in hovels, you know, and who didn't get educations, all the rest of it. You know, during the time of the Industrial Revolution, huge number, even as Britain was starting to expand and pillage the world and making money from looting every corner of the globe and slavery and looting of India and all of that, there were huge numbers of British workers who, you know, died at the age of 30, whose kids were sent to work in mines and mills and factories from the age of 5 or 6, you know, sent up chimneys as little kids, all the rest of it. So there was a majority section of the British working class all the way through the heyday of British imperialism that didn't benefit and had a really terrible condition of existence, even as there was a section of the British working class which was bribed, had a benefit from the empire, and imbibed that supremacist ideology of, you know, we the Brits just do things better, and became quite comfortable with their position in society. Something happened after World War II, which actually was a response to the weakening of British imperialism in the world and at home, and the advance of the Soviet Union and the socialist camp generally. Remember, the Chinese Revolution happened, the Vietnamese and the Korean and the Laotian, all in close succession together. National liberation movements are spreading. So the basis for imperialism was being undermined very much. British imperialism had been massively weakened by 2 world wars. The socialist and national liberation camp in the world was becoming really, really strong. And the demand of workers everywhere was, we want what the Soviet people have got. Right? The Soviet Union was the country which, during the period of the Great Depression between the 2 wars, was going from strength to strength, industrializing. The workers all had employment and you know, healthcare and education and all the things that workers everywhere else did not have. And they were demanding them. And in order to survive, British imperialism decided that it was going to have to, and all the Western imperialist countries did this, realized they were going to have to provide some kind of imitation of those social benefits in order to have social peace and avert revolution. You know, revolution was knocking on the door everywhere in Western Europe. The British were not in such a bad state as the Germans, the French, and the Italians, who frankly would have, all of those imperialisms would have been gone at the end of World War II if it wasn't for the USA. Various other revolutions were suppressed at that time, including the Greek, of course, which we talked about earlier. In Britain, British imperialism was really fatally wounded, and at that point, it hitched its wagon to that of the USA. From the Suez Crisis onwards in 1956, British imperialism really became a junior partner to the US because it no longer had the might independently to control so much of the world and to facilitate the continued looting by British finance capital, which remains a huge store of finance capital, is that which is in the hands of British financiers. It's, you know, one of the largest still stores in the world of finance capital, because the historical process of attracting wealth into the hands of these people has been going on for so long. And the more wealth you have, the more wealth you can attract. But in the imperialist global system, you have to be able to back up your financial might with military might. So anyway, you're talking about opportunism. The question in Britain is, what happened after World War II is not just a small section of the working class was given a bribe. The entire working class got a bribe to buy social peace. We got a pale imitation of what the workers in socialist countries have for a while. But it worked, because during that period, not only, so the Labour Party was in government, the Imperialist Labour Party, but it has the word Labour in its title, and it used to have words like socialism in its rule book and its programme, to fool workers into thinking it was a pro-worker, pro-socialist party, but which in reality has always been a party which wanted to run imperialism for the benefit of the imperialists, right? But in a way that they use a few words to confuse the working class. So the Labour Party has been the tool of British imperialism in the working class movement ever since its inception in 1900. It's played a very important role in pacifying the working class. In the period after World War II, where all these concessions were made to working people, the Labour Party was the party in charge of doing that. So it's always portrayed to us by the media as the Labour Party's programme. But it wasn't the Labour Party's programme, it was the ruling class's programme. The Tories would have done the same things because it was necessary for the continued rule of British imperialism in that time. The problem for the British working class is, at that time, our Communist Party, which up until that moment had been a good revolutionary party, basically became revisionist. They revised their programme. Even before Stalin died, they revised the British Communist programme. They said, we don't need a revolution in Britain. We're going to get our revolution through Parliament. We're going to get it by voting Labour and having an alliance with Labour against the monopolists, right? Totally anti-Leninist, because the character of the Labour Party is it's a pro-monopolist party. But the communists from 1951 onwards in Britain said, no, we'll get our revolution gradually by reforms through Parliament, combining with a mass movement. They say that for a frill, but essentially by voting Labour, we will put pressure on the Labour Party to steadily move to the left and implement socialist reforms until we're a socialist country. Okay, this was a lie. This effectively put the working class movement to sleep when you combine it with the material gains they were making, right? And this totally undermined what had been a militant and vibrant working class movement in Britain. And so we now have the problem that now that these gains are being undone, and increasingly a section of the British working class is coming where the bribes are getting less and less and less, and their standard of living is sinking very rapidly. And we're once more going back to the kind of imperialism that just has a small bribed layer, and the mass of the population are really sinking towards poverty. What they don't have is good leadership and good organization, precisely because we've had more than 100 years of people believing that the Labour Party was on their side. And now they find the Labour Party isn't on their side. They don't have a strong communist movement able to explain to them, who, what, and why that is and what they should be doing about it. Our party is trying very hard, to the best of our ability, to put forward a programme, to explain these things to people, to put forward a programme, to try to influence the discussion. Of course, we are very, very small, so it's a difficult job that's in front of us, but necessarily that's the job that has to be done, to tie up the question of opportunism to imperialism, the question of the war and the inflation to the crisis of capitalism, and to bring all those together to help workers understand that it's the struggle for socialism they need to be involved in.
I would like to ask you, are you going to Berlin 6th of October
Yes.
Because in the first May demonstration in this year, I was in Leipzig, and I was there in my brother, because my brother, he work and living in Germany, and he have contact with Kommunistische Organisation, and they organize a Congress, anti-imperialist Congress, and they wrote in the pamphlet that you will be there to speak in Berlin. So maybe we will meet in real there.
Oh yeah, great. Well, anyone who happens to be free to come to and speaks German, but I will be speaking English. Unfortunately, I don't speak German. Yes, I have been invited to speak at that Congress, and I will be there.
So thank you very much for this very interesting conversation. Unfortunately, we have some technical problems, but it is only the reason why you need to maybe one more time come back here without technical problems and continue our discussion.
I'll be happy to do that, comrade. And I just have to ask you whether you'll be, will you be making an edited version of this so that the people who come later can have it without all the glitches?
Yes. This version will be rest, but I will download it and I will cut this elements with problem of voice. So it will. I think that in our two hour discussion we have more than 1 hour with good sound. So we will find the good videos shorter from this.
Great. Okay. Well, I hope it can still be useful, and it was nice talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much one more time.
Take care.